Hello everyone, this is Jaclyn from Longarming by Jaclyn, and this is late, Top 5 Friday. It's already Saturday, and for today's Top 5 Friday, we're going to talk about the top 5 ways to stabilize your fabric. This is with regard to quilting. I know there's a whole world of stabilization out there for other crafts and garment sewing and different purposes, but for quilting, patchwork piecing, we're going to talk about that. But first, why do you care about stabilizing? So number one, if you are working on a project over time and there's a reason that your blocks are going to be stored and handled, so unless you're going to sit there and sew all your blocks in one, get them into a quilt top and get them finished in a relatively short amount of time, basically one long session, then it might be worth thinking about stabilizing the fabric. And then anytime you're doing any kind of applique, a lot of times you will stabilize the applique, whether you're doing a turned edge or a raw edge, to keep those shapes intact. And if you think about quilting, you are going to be not on the straight of grain a lot of times, especially applique, intricate. If you have a triangle, at least one of those sides has to be not on grain. Or if you have curved piecing, you're going to be biased, off grain, all different directions. So if you don't want to worry about keeping on the straight of grain, definitely helps to stabilize. Another kind of sleeper is if your presser foot pressure is high. So a lot of machines have a dial on the right, up here in the upper right area. If you have a mechanical machine, that adjusts the spring that pushes your presser foot down onto the needle plate. If you have a computerized machine, over here on the left on your controls, you're going to have some setting in there somewhere that adjusts your presser foot pressure. I find that the default presser foot pressure is always too high on every machine. I have a mechanical machine, it does not have adjustable presser foot pressure. It's crazy high. I have a computerized machine. It doesn't let you change the default and save that, so the next time you turn the machine on, it keeps that setting, so I have to change it every time. I don't know why that setting doesn't have a default, but whatever. I digress. For my purposes and the types of sewing that I do, it's generally speaking too high. And when the presser foot presses down on the needle plate and the fabric is being like held in place but pulled by the feed dogs, you can get baconing around the edges. And if you're just one of those people who's naturally hard on your blocks, if you have to seam rip. So all of this is going to take that unstabilized edge of fabric and start to take your nice squarely arranged fibers and fray them apart, and the fabric might be wavy. Things that were square might not be square anymore. You might trim things to the perfect size and then find that they're out of shape, maybe with a slightly rounded edge and too big, and you're having to trim again. All those things indicate that you are handling that fabric a little too roughly before it's stabilized enough to hold its shape. So what else do we have? So reasons is to keep your square square when everything, so it's nice and flat in the finished quilt. If you start to have, say, a half square triangle and one of the triangles warps open, now you have this volume and this bubble of fullness in the quilt that's not going to lay nice and flat when you're trying to piece things together and get things to line up, or later when you're quilting, you'll have sort of a volume of poofiness there that now what are you going to do with it? It's already there. And then probably the number one reason to stabilize is if you're going to make a t-shirt quilt, if you're going to be cutting fabric from clothing or any kind of like vintage fabric. It might be a knit, it might have some stretchiness or elasticity, it might have an open weave where it's not a stretchy fabric, but as soon as you cut it, it just starts to sort of fray and be open. It's not as tightly woven, so those fibers tend to want to drift apart and lose their shape. And that's probably the most common reason that you really are going to stabilize in quilting, other than maybe applique. And then some other ones, if you're going to be putting some embroidery on there, you'll want to stabilize for that. So that's why you might need stabilization in your quilting. And let's talk about some quick hot tips for making your stabilization more successful. Number one, you always want to stabilize first and then cut. Once you've cut to the desired shape, you're already losing stability and losing shape while you're trying to get the stabilizer on there. So it does waste a little bit of stabilizer to stabilize a larger area and then cut out from there. But that's the only way you're going to get your stabilizer to end exactly at the edge, and that's exactly what you want, is stability at the edge more than anything. And some techniques you only need to stabilize the edge. And then you do want to think about the end use of that product and what that fabric or those fabrics can take when you choose your stabilizer. So if you have a high heat fusible that needs to be ironed on with a high heat, but you've got a delicate synthetic fabric, that's not going to be the method for that application, because that fabric cannot take that heat. And other stabilizers require steam, but if you have something like a silk that doesn't like moisture, that might not be the way for you. So you have to think about the end use application and whether it's going to be suitable to the stabilization. Some of these stabilizers, this is Suretail, which is an interfacing that I do use as a stabilizer sometimes. It's quite stout, so if you have a very light and flowy fabric and you want to keep that in the end finished product, you wouldn't, look how much body that has. I mean, that's like straight out, there's no droop at all. So if you want a drapey finished product and you stabilize it with this, which is fusible, it's going to stay on there. This is originally designed for use in like collars of shirts to give them that nice crisp, and it folds over and holds the shape really nicely. So this is a heavy stabilizer. So generally speaking, heavier stabilizers go with heavier fabrics because it takes more to hold them steady. And lighter fabrics will take a lighter, drapier stabilizer to maintain those qualities that you were looking for. And think about whether you want that stabilizer to be there on a permanent basis or on a temporary basis. So something like this is permanent, but if you need it to hold steady while you're cutting and sewing and finishing, and then you want it to go away, this is not the way. This is a piece of fabric here. There's fiber, there's a lot of body, and it's a permanent fusible. So this is not going away. So if you want a t-shirt quilt to be sort of drapey and stretchy and soft, but you just need those t-shirts to hold still while you're sewing them, you have to find a product that's as temporary as you need it to be. And lastly, some of these methods have adherence on both sides and some have it only on one. So let's go back to our good friend Suretail. This has fusible on one side and it's basically like a plain white fabric on the other side. So this is got stickiness and is going to give stability to one side, whereas this product is from Spraybased, which is part of the Warm company. And let's see if I can open this up and find the label. This label gets cut as you use it. So this is Spraybased Light 2, and it's on this roll of fabric, and this is designed to be used for applique purposes. It is sticky on both sides. So it has one side which has fusible, and then this other side which looks like paper is peel and stick. So it does have stickiness on each side. This one is just pressure. You just peel it off and whack it on there. And then the other one, once you finish your applique, this becomes iron-on. So you might want something that stabilizes sticky on both sides. You might want something that stabilizes sticky on the other side. So speaking of fusible, this product by Bonash, Fuse It Powder, is a way to take anything and make it fusible. So you have a special mat that is like, I want to say it's Teflon, special pressing mat. You find them shown as like applique pressing mats, and it's slippery. And it's similar to when you have a sticker, the backing that you peel off, how it's slippery on the inside, on the side that's toward the sticky, it's like that. And so you sprinkle this on your fabric, you put the protective pressing mat over it, and you put it down, and this is almost like you took hot glue and crumbled it up into little salt-sized granules. And so you melt that and create a sheet of fusible across your product. And let's say that's a little applique cutout, and then you, obviously that goes on the wrong side, then you put that on your project and melt again, and that fuses, and you don't have anything in between other than these granules. Similar, but in sheet form, is this Heat and Bond. And this is paper backed, and it's just sheets of the fusible with no fiber. So whereas this shirttail has basically like a fabric on there with fusible on one side, and you can feel the gritty side with the little fusible. This is basically like dots of hot glue printed on fabric. This is like a sheet of hot glue printed on a disposable piece of paper. So you melt the glue onto your surface, your fabric, whatever, your applique piece, then you peel off the backing and you're left with just glue, just the fusible, which is like fusible web is what they call it, which is kind of like a thin sheet of hot glue if you have to imagine it. And there's no fiber to this. There's no like fabric, this is just glue. And then if you took this just glue and crushed it into teeny tiny powder like salt, you have this Bone Ash product. All right, so let's get down to my top 5 methods to stabilize fabrics for use in quilts. Let's be specific about that. My favorite method, which is quick and easy, has been using Spraybased. And I can get this product. It's a lot less expensive than the other brand name that you find. And if you're interested in ordering some of this through me, let me know. This is Sprayway Fast Tack 89, and I love this a lot. So this is a regular temporary Spraybased. Be aware, this as well as pretty much every other Spraybased out there, the hold is temporary. However, the adhesive does not go away. It's not like water-based, so it will release its hold gradually over time. But you cannot use this on something that you're going to hold in place temporarily and then it's going to be the outside of something, because there will be a little tacky residue left even after several washings. So it will lose its holding power. That's what means temporary. But all those Spraybased that say temporary, they don't wash out and leave you perfectly clean fabric that can be on the outside of your product. So how do I use Spraybased to stabilize fabrics? I get a cheap, thin muslin, and typically in a white, so it doesn't show through any lighter colors or have any kind of a pattern. But basically, you can use cut up sheets, whatever you want. And I put a thin layer of Spraybased, and I will put my cheaper fabric onto the back of, say, a t-shirt that's going into a t-shirt quilt, or some shirts that have a looser, more open weave, and it tends to fray apart and bake in, lose its shape very readily. It's one of my favorite. So you have to be able to be in an environment where you can tolerate aerosol. This does have some overspray. You can't do this over your fine wooden dining table, or I know people who do this over carpet. Apparently it's fine, but I wouldn't. So I have a big work surface. I have a well-ventilated studio. I use this product all the time. So I like that method. It is fast, it is easy, it is inexpensive. You can use waste and scrap fabric that you have on hand to be the stabilizer, and it holds, knits together very nicely. So I just Spraybased the back of my, say it's a t-shirt for t-shirt quilt, lay some plain thin cheap fabric on the back, and then cut my strips or squares or whatever have you to shape. And that is one of my favorite methods. It is so quick. If you've ever had to iron a large area, you will understand that fusible can be frustrating. You have to count the seconds, and it's this much area at a time. And that's not a rectangle or a square, so they don't exactly tile together nice and neatly. And it is very time consuming. If you think about a t-shirt quilt, that is a queen size worth of fabric plus extra for trimming excess and seam allowances, and you're pressing this much at a time, 15 seconds. It's laborious. When you're in a busy shop and time is money, it's not the way. So speaking of which, fusible. For small projects, I do use quite a bit of fusible interfacing. So even my Steam Steam 2, this is I guess it's a 13 inch, maybe a 1 foot roll by however many yards that I have here. I use this suretail quite a bit to add body. Fusible tends to be a more permanent bond, so it's not going to be a temporary application. It's all one product. You don't have to worry about aerosol and overspray, but it is more time consuming. You have to sit there with your iron, set the iron in one space. Each product is different, so follow the instructions, but it can be 15 seconds for each little stamp this size, and then you move on. And sometimes if you overmelt or undermelt, you have bubbles where it hasn't adhered. It can be very frustrating. But for small projects, I do like a fusible. This suretail is meant for collars, so that's a strip of fabric like this, maybe longer. I mean, it's not a lot of fabric. So along those lines is peel and stick. And one of my favorite products in this category is Vilene Tacky. It's Vilene D0102. And that's another product that I can get. So DM me if you're interested in that. It is peel and stick on one side and nothing on the other side. So if you only want sticky on one side, and it is great for t-shirt quilts, and it's super fast, and the fiber, like the fabric that sticky pressure sensitive adhesive is what they call it, but it's peel and stick. It's like a big sticker, so fast to put on the back of a t-shirt, whack it on there, you are done. If time is money, that is the fastest, and it is a little bit more expensive, but worth it in time to get you moving through the prep of harvesting fabric and onto sewing and selling the quilt, which is where you make your money, or get to the finish line if you're not sewing for a business. And what's great about the Vilene D0102 is it is dissolvable. So if you want temporary, you rinse it in warm water if your fabric can tolerate that, if your end project can tolerate that, and the fiber itself dissolves. It's made of gelatin, so you put in a little warm water and it is completely gone. And so that is a wonderful product. You can do appliques, and if you've ever done a turned edge applique and you have a little lip of white interfacing sticking out, that's where you take the 2 layers, sew your shape, snip the interfacing, flip it inside out like a pillow, and then you have the fusible side of your interfacing and a turned edge little shape, and then you fuse that onto your finished surface, and the edges are all neatly under. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, but sometimes that little white edge of interfacing sticks out around the edge of your applique. Well, with the Vilene, you don't have to worry about that, because once it rinses, it's completely gone, completely dissolves. There's nothing there. The stickiness dissolves. There's no residue. It's just gone. And that Vilene product comes in a peel and stick, and then in a nothing, where there's no stickiness on either side. So depending on how you like to work and what you're doing, that's a great product. It's a little bit more expensive, but it is worth it if you are in a hurry, or you hate that little white where the little fold shows on the side, especially like a dark quilt. Oof, you don't want to see that white little, looks like your underwear is hanging out. It's not the way. But also under peel and stick is this Warm Company. This is a lightweight, basically like an interface stabilizer, and it is peel and stick on one side and fusible on the other. Very similar product to that. Those are, because you've got glue, paper, it's a little bit more of a specialty product, whatever. Those are always going to be a little bit more expensive, but they're so convenient, so fast. So if time is what bogs you down, you're in a hurry to get this done correctly, accurately, be done for whatever reason, peel and stick, that is your advantage. All right, so the next method, which is kind of obvious coming from a quilter, to stabilize fabric is to sew it. So the thread is stretchy, and it's got the two threads looping together and locking it in place. So wherever you have a seam, you've created a stable point in your fabric. So if you have blocks and you have to put them into storage and then pull them out and you're going to assemble them later, or if you're going to transport a finished top quilt to the Longarmer and it's going to be mailed and handled and sent back, or if you find some attic quilts, the best thing to do is pop them under your machine, use a light presser foot pressure, and it really doesn't matter what stitch. Go really close to the edge so it doesn't show, and you're just gonna zip down with a straight stitch all the way around the perimeter. And using it's called a stay stitch, will keep those edges in shape and keep them from smearing and baconing out while you're handling and transporting or doing whatever you have to do with your fabric. If you ever have to, let's say you found some really beautiful attic squares, but they've got that little attic must, stay stitch them before you hand launder and soak those, and they will retain their shape through the washing process. Don't stick them in the washing machine. Stay stitch them, mix some warm water with detergent already mixed in, so agitate before you put the fabric in. Soak the squares, soak them in plain warm water multiple times if you need to get out the soap residue. It doesn't need to be a real strong mixture. A little bit of soap in a bunch of warm water in a basin or whatever have you, and then air dry. But stay stitch them before you do that, because even just that delicate handling on a vintage quilt block is going to start to deform and lose shape. All right, and then stay stitching is the same as top stitching, which is basically the same as quilting. So that is why you can throw a finished quilt in the washing machine, because all of those quilting stitches have made stabilization all over the quilt. And old school garments, before fusibles and all these adhesives were really a thing, all of your stabilizers in your collar, in your cuff, older sewing projects, they had sewn in interfacing. So that's kind of the oldest method in the book to stabilize fabric, is to sew it. Put some thread in there, put a stiffer, more bodied fiber in there if that's appropriate for your project. Sewing things is the OG way of stabilizing your fabrics. So if you have a vintage top and you're not going to hand quilt it, my recommendation is to take that to a Longarmer and have them long arm it with a decent amount of density, because those older fabrics are frail and a lot of stitching is going to hold them in, lock those fibers in, and preserve that a little bit better and keep it a little more intact. Whereas less quilting is less stabilization and you're starting to lose those fabrics faster. And then this is a fun one. It's temporary, it's cheap, it's available. You probably have this in your house right now, whether it's in your sewing room or not. So starch or glue, and you can use regular school glue. This is good old Elmer's. This is glue stick. If you apply glue and let it dry, you'll get a nice crispy, like your squares will be like almost like credit cards, stiff, crispy credit cards. And then as soon as this is all water soluble, so as soon as you wash it, all of that has gone away. So this will hold your fabrics nice and crisp and steady while you're handling them, while you're working with them, until they're stabilized by the quilting and the binding. And then it goes away and returns that soft hand. Of course, it's water soluble, so your fabrics have to be able to get wet. Your final project has to be able to be washed. For a normal quilt, you're washing those anyways. But starch is very similar to glue, and you can try some Elmer's white glue and dilute it and soak your fabric, let it air dry, and then cut it out. You'll have a nice sort of crispy, almost like cardstock like finish to work with until you get it wet. I don't use steam irons, so steam is not a problem for me, but obviously this is water soluble. If you put steam on it, it's going to break down your stiffness and return it to that sort of wet glue state that you don't want. Glue stick is the same as regular glue, it just has less water in it, so it dries faster. You don't have to wait for as much water to evaporate, but you can apply this around the edge where your seam allowances are to put more stability. It's not as strong of a bond as some of the other bonds. If you really handle it, you can weaken and break this down, or just the moisture from your hands can start to break this down. Like if you really try to make it unstable, you can, but glue or starch saturating your fabrics can help make them more stable. So that's it. My top 5 ways to stabilize fabrics for your quilting. All right, thank you so much for joining me here at Longarming by Jaclyn for our latest and greatest Top 5 Friday video. And I understand that this video is coming out late on a Saturday and you're probably not watching it this evening, so it's like Top 5 Sunday, but that doesn't rhyme. That doesn't alliterate. So we're doing Top 5 Friday late. Thank you so much. I hope that you like this video. I hope you'll support the channel by clicking subscribe and the notify bell so that you are notified of all the updates on our channel. You can find me on Facebook or on Instagram. Have a great day. Bye.